Hello, BISC1323. This is the beginning of recorded lecture 5.1. The respiratory system is where we're starting. So, some quick background about this, background slash review. Let's talk about cellular respiration. So, okay, this may conjure up some memories from BISC1323 about glycolysis and pyruvate oxidation and the electron transport chain and all of this fun stuff. You don't have to remember all of the details of this process, but I do want to refresh us about the big picture about what's going on here. Cellular respiration is a metabolic pathway that is performed by all cells. It involves the breakdown of glucose to carbon dioxide in order to generate ATP, which powers pretty much everything in the cell. The process requires O2. So in order to do this process, which again is required for life because you need ATP to live, and this is pretty much the only way to generate ATP, we need to acquire O2 and we need to get rid of CO2. So these gases need to be exchanged, and that's what the respiratory system is going to achieve. Like I said, just some background here. So let's start by talking about some anatomy involved in the respiratory system. So we're not going to hit all of these terms here, but the important ones are the trachea, which let's move to, so this is more anatomically correct, but this one's a little bit cleaner. The trachea, the widest of these tubes, down to the bronchi, which branch out, to the bronchioles, which are branching even more. So we've got branches and branches and branches and branches. And then at the ends of these bronchioles, we have these structures called alveolar sacs, which are made of a bunch of alveoli. Alveolus is singular, and alveoli is plural. So to summarize all these terms, air travels from the mouth to the nose through the trachea, through these branched bronchi, to the bronchioles, to the alveolar sacs, which contain alveoli. Again, I know it's a lot, but this does a good job of showing you all of these structures. The purpose of all of this is to have as much surface area as possible. These alveolar sacs have a lot of surface area, and if you just had one big sac, like imagine one big sac at the bottom of this trachea, you would have a certain amount of surface area, but by having alveolar sacs at the ends of all of these bronchioles branched throughout these lungs, that gives a tremendous amount of surface area. Why does the surface area matter? Well, if we look at what covers the surface of these alveoli, it's blood capillaries. So the gas exchange that's happening, and remember that is obtaining O2 and getting rid of CO2, happens from the air that fills these sacs and the blood, these gases in the blood. So these alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, so gases can exchange with the blood. So now that we've talked about some of the anatomy of the lungs, let's talk about the actual process of breathing. So the way that we breathe, the way our vertebrate respiratory system works, is we alter the air pressure in our bodies in order to make air move. So simple physics lesson, fluids, which include liquids and gases, we're carrying about gases, but technically liquids follow the same law. Fluids move from high pressure to low pressure. So as we're talking about changes in pressure and manipulating pressure, remember the gas, the air, is always going to move from an area of high pressure to an area of lower pressure. Okay, so what is this process? Breathing. Step one, inhalation. So when you inhale, if you want to take a deep breath in, what you're doing is you are contracting muscles on the walls of your chest and you're contracting this big muscle down here, which separates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. This is called the diaphragm. I'll define that in the next slide, but you're contracting these muscles, and that is increasing the size of this cavity. When you take a space and suddenly make it bigger, expand its size, that creates a lower pressure zone in this thoracic cavity. Remember what we just said. Fluids, including gases, move from high pressure to low pressure. So if we create a low pressure zone, air is naturally going to want to move from the outside world into this thoracic cavity, filling the lungs and allowing gas exchange to happen in these blood capillaries surrounding all these alveolar sacs. So to summarize, inhalation increases the size of the thoracic or chest cavity. Muscles on the walls of the chest and the diaphragm contract. Diaphragms and the key terms. It is a dome-shaped skeletal muscle located under the lungs that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. But yeah, these muscles contract. This decreases or lowers the pressure in the thoracic cavity. That causes air to enter the lungs because the pressure inside the thoracic cavity is lower than that of the outside world. Okay, so now we've inhaled. Our next step is to do this gas exchange. And, I talked about this already. Gases are going to move from the blood to the air, from the air to the blood. But there's a little more detail to this. So remember that two gases are oxygen and CO2. Oxygen, as it turns out, is a really nasty compound. O2 is dangerous. It could damage a lot of things in the body if they come into contact with O2. So we need this to do cellular respiration, but we want to keep it safe. We don't want this oxygen just floating around willy-nilly in the bloodstream. So when we acquire oxygen from the air that enters these alveolar sacs, we're going to attach it to a protein called hemoglobin, which is present within red blood cells. So these blood cells are going to circulate throughout the body. We'll talk more about that in the circulatory system, which is coming up right after this chapter. But the oxygen is on this protein, in this protein hemoglobin, in these red blood cells. So O2 binds to hemoglobin, parentheses, a protein inside of red blood cells. All right, what about CO2? Well, CO2, carbon dioxide, is not as dangerous as O2 is, but we're going to make interesting use of it. So when we have CO2 in the bloodstream, we're going to convert some of this to something called bicarbonate, which acts as a buffer compound for the blood pH. Maybe you remember this figure from BISC1323, this carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer, this chemical compound that sometimes acted like a base, sometimes acted like an acid in order to keep the pH from getting too high or too low. Well, we get this from CO2. So this is pretty clever. We're taking a waste product, remember we're trying to get rid of this, and we're actually building something useful out of it. Well, we are doing that, that's true, but we only need so much bicarbonate. We only need so much buffering capability in the blood. So it's doing an important job on its way out, because once this bicarbonate reaches the lungs, it's converted back to CO2, incidentally by enzymes on the red blood cells, so that it can exit the body in the form of CO2. So we're getting rid of CO2, we're acquiring O2 with some details in here as well. Now, we're ready to get rid of this air that we've taken a lot of the oxygen out of, and we've put some CO2 into it. We're ready to exhale. This is the exact opposite of inhalation. So we're going to relax the muscles on the walls of our chest, and we're going to relax this diaphragm muscle, and that is going to squish up the technical term there, squish. It's going to decrease the size of this thoracic cavity, so this space becomes smaller, and that's going to increase the pressure inside of the thoracic cavity. Remember, fluids move from high pressure to low pressure. The pressure of the outside world hasn't changed, but it's all relative. Now, relative to the outside world, it's higher in the thoracic cavity than it is in the outside world. So air is naturally going to move from the lungs to the outside world when we exhale. So this decreases the size of the thoracic cavity as muscles on the walls of the chest and the diaphragm relax, increasing pressure in the thoracic cavity, and the air naturally exits the body. So again, the positive and negative, this is all relative. The outside world doesn't change. It's air pressure as you're standing there breathing. What's changing is the air pressure inside of this cavity as you contract and relax these muscles. Okay, that's it for the respiratory system chapter. This was a short one. It's pretty straightforward. We, however, are not done with this recorded lecture. Let's continue on and pick up talking about the circulatory. Let's start things off by talking about blood, the components of blood. So there are a lot of things that can be found within blood. We could break this down into three main things: blood components. Blood equals, if we want to put this in math terms, blood is plasma, blood cells, and platelets. All three of these things together make up what we call blood or whole blood. So obviously, we're going to talk about each of these in turn, starting off by talking about plasma. So plasma has a lot of stuff in it, but what you should understand is that all of these things are small, and this is really mostly water. So the key terms define plasma as the liquid component of blood that is left after the cells and platelets are removed. So yeah, it's liquid component because it is mostly water. But what's in there other than water? Well, there are some nutrients like glucose and amino acids, some useful things that are present inside of the plasma. There are wastes, and we'll talk about getting rid of these wastes in a later chapter, but things like urea are circulating in the plasma as well. There are hormones. Remember, these are signaling molecules, ligands, messengers, and they're using the blood plasma as a way to get a ride, to move around the body. We're also going to see some ions, like the blood pH buffer bicarbonate that we just talked about in the end of the last chapter. That's going to be present in plasma as well. These are all relatively small molecules, but moving on to things that are slightly larger, we do also see some proteins present in the plasma portion of blood. Fat carriers are an example. Things like sugars and amino acids, they dissolve in water, so they're going to circulate throughout the body on their own. But I think we all know that fat doesn't dissolve in water. So if we want to move fats around the body, we got to have proteins that carry them. And there are many other proteins that are present in plasma as well. And finally, there are clotting factors. So we'll talk about blood clotting a little bit later because it involves some other things as well. But there are also proteins that help blood clot that are also present in this plasma portion of things. As kind of a side note to these clotting factors, there's a key term here, serum. The key terms define this as blood plasma without the clotting factors. So plasma has all of this stuff, but if you don't want this plasma to, clot up, the clotting factors will be removed or destroyed, and then we refer to that blood product as serum. It's just plasma, but without the clotting factors. So we don't actually see the plasma in a picture like this because, again, it's all very small molecules, proteins, and water, so it's kind of just in the background of the blood. But what about the other components? Well, next let's talk about cells. So there are many different types of blood cells that are present in the blood, but we can break this down into two categories: red blood cells or erythrocytes and white blood cells or leukocytes. Let's talk about the red ones first. So red blood cells, sometimes abbreviated RBCs, just red blood cells, are more formally known as erythrocytes. You see the red ones here. I always think their shape kind of reminds me of these Werther's original candies because they have a unique shape. They're disc-like with sort of a flattened center. Most cells are kind of like a sphere, but they have this flat center, and that's because of how something that happens during their development. So don't worry about all of these stages here, but just follow along with me as we go to the journey of becoming a red blood cell. We go from this cell to this cell to it's going through all these maturation steps, and oh, look at what's happening here. Nucleus ejected. So yeah, a mature erythrocyte does not have a nucleus, which is really weird because the nucleus is typically, the most important organelle that a cell has. It's the brain, it's the instructions. Yeah, these red blood cells are kind of brainless. They're not replicating. They just do their job. And we already talked about what their job is in the last chapter. Their job is to be chock full of hemoglobin and circulate this oxygen throughout the body. So they don't actually need a brain or a nucleus to do this job. And that allows them to have this weird flattened disc shape. So how do I summarize this? Well, these erythrocytes are disc-shaped with no nucleus. They contain hemoglobin protein, which carries O2. And I know this, I can scroll back a bit, this confuses some students. There are most proteins, a lot of proteins are present in the plasma portion of blood, but hemoglobin in specific is a protein that is not found within the plasma. It's inside of these red blood cells. So these erythrocytes contain hemoglobin, which carries O2. Okay, what about the other blood cells? What about the white blood cells, or WBCs, also known as leukocytes? Well, there are lots of different types of leukocytes, even more than what is shown here, but I actually don't want to talk about them at all in this chapter. These white blood cells are involved in the immune system, so we will look at lots of different leukocytes and their function when we get to the chapter on the immune system. So just for now, know this statement. Our final component of blood, beside plasma and those two types of blood cells, is platelets. So platelets, we can see here, they're smaller than a cell, these little white yellowy things here. Platelets are actually cell fragments. So here's a megakaryocyte which creates these platelets by ripping off small pieces of itself. So they're not cells, they're cell fragments. And the job of platelets is to help blood clot. And this is the second time I mentioned blood clotting, and this is in addition to these clotting factors found within the plasma. These platelets are going to combine with those proteins and form this clot, which can prevent blood loss. So platelets are cell fragments, and they're involved in clotting along with some of these plasma proteins. Okay, now that we've talked about what's in blood, let's talk about the actual circulation of blood. Now, I'm trying to not make all these anatomy chapters be just, human anatomy and physiology, but admittedly, I am starting off with human anatomy and physiology. We're going to go through blood circulation as we see in a human, but after this, I want to compare and contrast this circulation to other non-human or non-mammalian vertebrates. So keep that in mind, but let's start by talking about human circulation. Now, there isn't really a beginning or an end to this process of blood circulation. It kind of just, goes on continuously for as long as you're alive. But, for the sake of just choosing, I am going to start somewhere to go through these steps. Let's start, and again, I'm numbering these just for our convenience, but let's start in the head and the body. blood in the head and the body is going to lose its O2 because that's the point. It has this O2 so that it can deliver it to these tissues in the head and the body which need this O2 to do their cellular respiration. So once this blood has given up its O2 to these surrounding tissues, we refer to this blood as being deoxygenated, blood that doesn't have oxygen. And deoxygenated blood is drawn the color blue. This is just a convention that every textbook I have ever seen uses for our convenience. It's drawn this way, and we can see this here. Yeah, here's the body. This blood is giving off its oxygen, and yeah, now it's drawn blue. I want to clarify, your blood is never actually blue. Sometimes it may look blue if you have pale skin. You can kind of look at your arm and you can see some veins that definitely look blue. That has to do with the way light is filtered through your skin. It's not actually blue, it's always red, but this is a convenient just drawing convention. We'll always know what's oxygenated and deoxygenated because the deoxygenated bits are drawn the color blue. Okay, so now we have deoxygenated blood. Let's think about this logically. We know where it's supposed to go. It's blood that doesn't have oxygen. It needs to go to the lungs so that it can get oxygen. But the problem is, it doesn't have the power to make it to the lungs. This blood has just finished a big circuit through the head and the body, and it doesn't have the power to make it to the lungs. So it has to make a pit stop in the heart. So this blood, this deoxygenated blood, is going to enter the heart through veins into a chamber called the right atrium. Now, a couple of things in this statement. Veins, let me read the key terms definition. A vein is a blood vessel that brings blood back to the heart. So we're not memorizing the names of all these veins, but anything that is called a vein is going to the heart, and anything going to the heart is referred to as a vein. So what's the deal with this right atrium? Well, if we zoom in on a human heart, or any mammalian heart would look like this, we see that there are 4 distinct chambers within this heart. We'll hit all 4 of them eventually, but right now we are in this right atrium chamber right here. And hey, look, it's blue because we're dealing with deoxygenated blood. So there's going to be another atrium on the other side of the heart. Blood always enters through atria. So of these 4 chambers, if blood is coming into the heart, it's going to be entering into an atrium. Oh, another thing to point out here. This is the right atrium, despite it looking like the left side of the heart. This is another convention that pretty much every textbook uses. When a heart is depicted, it is drawn as if you were looking at a patient, as if you were looking at someone standing in front of you. So even though this is on your left and this is on your right, to that person, this is their left side, this is their right side. So that's why it's kind of flipped. This is just how these things are always drawn. So, okay, we've got deoxygenated blood entering into the right atrium. We got to get this to the lungs so it can get oxygen. But remember, an atrium is not a chamber for sending things out. An atrium is a chamber for receiving things. So we have to pump this blood from the right atrium to the right ventricle. A ventricle is going to send the blood out of the heart. And importantly, there is a valve here, the tricuspid valve, but don't worry about it, that makes sure this is one-way movement. We don't want any backwash. We don't want any of this circulation to go backwards, so a valve makes sure that it only goes in one direction. Blood is pumped from the right atrium to the right ventricle. Now, in the right ventricle, this blood is going to be pumped out of the heart and toward the lungs where it can acquire oxygen. So blood, just a reminder, still deoxygenated, pumped through an artery to the lungs. So we defined a vein as being something that leads to the heart. An artery is the opposite. Let me read. The key term says an artery is a blood vessel that takes blood away from the heart. And yep, it goes to the lungs. Importantly, blood always exits the heart through ventricles. So enters in atria, vents out through ventricles. So yeah, makes sense. If it's exiting the heart on the right side, it's going to be the right ventricle that does this. Now, the blood makes its way to the lungs, and we have gas exchange. All the stuff that we talked about in the previous chapter. This blood is going to go from being blue to red. Again, it's never blue; it's always a shade of red. But now we're drawing it red because it is oxygenated blood. So, at the lungs, blood obtains O2. It is now oxygenated. It is now drawn the color red. Logically speaking, we know where this blood is supposed to go next. It now has oxygen. The whole point of this is to deliver that oxygen to the head and the body. But it doesn't have the power to do that. It just finished going through these lungs. So we have to make another stop at the heart before we can send this oxygenated blood to the head and the body. So here we see the blood from the lungs coming back to the heart, this time on the other side, on the left side, coming in to the left atrium. Remember, blood always enters in an atrium. This time we're on the left side, but it's going to be the left atrium. So oxygenated blood enters the heart from the lungs at the left atrium. You know the deal. It's the same thing that we saw on the other side of the heart. If it's going to enter through an atrium, it has to exit through a ventricle. So we're going to pump this oxygenated blood from the left atrium to the left ventricle. And there's another valve here that's going to make sure this is one-way movement and we don't get it flowing backwards. So blood pumped from left atrium to left ventricle, and there's another valve that ensures that this is one-way movement. And finally, we are at the left ventricle. We know that ventricles are where blood exits the heart. So this oxygenated blood is going to exit the heart. And again, logically speaking, it's oxygenated blood. We know where it's going to go. It's going to have to go out to the head and the body so it can deliver that oxygen. Blood oxygenated is pumped from the left ventricle out to the head and the body. From there, it's going to deliver this oxygen, and that's going to take us back to step number 1 again, where it loses its O2, given to surrounding tissues. It becomes deoxygenated again, and, repeat 1 through 8 for the rest of your life. So again, the 1 through 8 are kind of arbitrary. I had to pick somewhere arbitrary to start, but the sequence of events of what happens and what happens next, what happens next, what happens next is something you should understand. And a lot of this is very logical, of deoxygenated blood coming into the heart and then going to the lungs so it can get oxygen, and oxygenated blood coming into the heart and then going out to the body to deliver that oxygen. I pointed out that blood always enters in an atrium and exits from a ventricle. Understanding that will help you remember these 4 chambers. The other thing that I think will help you out is to remember that the right side of the heart always deals with deoxygenated blood. So the right atrium is receiving deoxygenated blood, the right ventricle is sending out deoxygenated blood, and the left side of the heart always deals with oxygenated blood. The left atrium is receiving oxygenated blood, and the left ventricle is sending out oxygenated blood. So this is another note just to help you here. Right side deals with deoxygenated blood. Left side deals with oxygenated blood. Okay, as promised, we're going to now compare this human circulation to that of other animals, but actually I don't think there's enough time to fully get into that now, so here's where I'm going to end things for recorded lecture 5.1. We'll finish up this circulatory system chapter and do some comparative anatomy in the next one, but this is the end of